friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Lawn Fawn's Pick of the Patch add-on, Spring Basket add-on Fall, Halloween Mice, Jump for Joy, Let's Go Nuts, Porcupine for You, Happy Harvest, You Autumn Know, and You Are Sublime. So I've stamped those images on 2 panels of Catherine Pooler Favorite White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. So for this card, I wanted to create kind of a fall rainbow set in a nighttime scene. So I am going to start with my first combo, which is a red. It's kind of like a cranberry red, which I think works great for fall. I'm using R35, R37, and R39, and I'm going to color in all of my little mushrooms. I'm starting with that R39 and adding in a nice bit of shadow down at the bottom of the mushroom caps, and then blending upward with the R37, just being really careful not to get any of that red in the little white spots, because red is easy to bleed into those tiny little areas. And then I'm going to fill in the remaining area with that R35. Then I'm also going to use these shades for a few of my fall leaves, and I'll also be coloring that separate sheet off to the side off screen. We would have been here all day if I would have colored both of these panels on screen, because there are just so many images on today's card, but I love a scene that is really full and detailed, and I was just really in the mood to create that today. Next in our fall rainbow is going to be orange, but again, I'm going to go with some more pumpkin kind of tones. I'm using YR12, YR14, and YR18, and I'm going to start with my little fox. I'm using that YR18 to lay in some shadows on the back of his head and the tip of his nose, his little ears. I'll put that under his neck, on his chest area, the underside of his arms, and the back of his hindquarters, and then also where his tail is attached to his body. And then I'm going to blend that out with the YR14, and then I'll fill in with the YR12 for a nice highlight. I thought about leaving some white area on his belly as well, but decided against it. So I'm going to just fill everything in, and then I'll also use these shades for the beaks of my owl and my crow. I forgot to do my owl's feet, but I'll come back and do that later off screen. And then once again, I am going to add some of this into my fall leaves. My leaves at my house are starting to change, so we are definitely into fall now. And as much as I absolutely love summer, it is so pretty to see those leaves starting to change. I will do the center pumpkin in my little trio here with this combo, and then I'm going to switch it up for the other two just to have it broken up a bit and not just have them all 3 exactly the same. So I'm adding that color to the top and bottom of the pumpkins, and adding my highlight in the center where it would be most rounded and catch most light. For the other 2 pumpkins, I'm going to go with a brighter orange combo. I'm using YR04, YR07, and YR09. This time I'm placing my YR09 at the top and bottom of each of those pumpkins. I'll blend that out with the YR07, just carefully coloring around the center one that I've already done. I don't want to have any bleeding onto that. And then I will come in with that YR04 to finish these off. And that just makes the one in front stand out even further, I think. So I'm really pleased with how that turned out. Next up in my rainbow is yellow, but I'm going to go for a golden toned yellow. I'm using Y13 with YR21 and YR24. and I'll add this to my sunflower using that YR24 closest to the center, and then also on the petals that are behind the front ones. And then I'll blend that out with the YR21. So those two shades have a really nice golden tone. It's almost got a little bit of brown into it, but it's going to warm up nicely once I add that bright Y13 in there and just make it really deep and vibrant. And then I'll also add some of this into my fall leaves, of course. Just picking a couple here and there that aren't right up next to each other to add those colors to, so that we can spread those little pops of color around the scene. And I also use these for the separate little leaf that is right next to that little mushroom cluster. Then I'm going to come in with some greens. I'm using G40, G43, and G46. Again, going with more desaturated shades that I think are going to represent the rainbow, but give it that fall kind of lean to it. So I'm going to use these for my 3 pumpkin leaves. I'll also add it to my pile of leaves and do that little cluster of leaves next to my little mushrooms. Starting with that G46, blending out with the G43, and filling in with the G40. I wanted just a touch of a brighter green, so I went with YG00, YG01, and YG03 for my snail's body. I'm going to skip over the blue in the rainbow because that is going to be represented in the sky, and I will move straight into violet. I'm using V12, V15, and V17 for my snail's shell, and I'll also use this on some more of my little fall leaves. I think that nice little pop of purple in there breaks up those really warm fall tones. It has a bit of a cooler tone to it. It's just a little something unexpected and also just pulls in that rainbow vibe. So now I've got a whole bunch of neutrals that I need to add to this card. I'm going to start with some browns using E43, E44, and E47 for the center of my sunflower. I'm going to use the E47 also to fill in those little 3 dots that represent the seeds. And I will use these shades for my acorn caps and my little stump, and also the stems of my 3 pumpkins. So I'm starting with the E47 for all of that, blending out with the E44, and then using the E43 for the highlight. Once I'm done with those, I'm also going to use these shades for my little hedgehog's spines. So I'm going to start with the lightest shade for this one and build up using that E43 and just doing quick little flicks to mimic the drawn lines that are already there. Then I added some with the E44 and also with the E47. And I'll leave a little bit of white space in that mix to make them look shiny. Next, I'll bring in kind of like a creamy beige. I'm using E000 with E50 and E51, and I will color in the top of my stump, all of the little spots and stems of my mushrooms, and I will also use this on my hedgehog's body, starting with that E51, blending out with the E50, and then I'll use that E000 for a highlight. And on the hedgehog, I left just the tiniest bit of white under the chin area for some extra highlight. I also use these for the nut part of my acorn and the white parts of my fox. On the fox, I just left a lot more plain white cardstock for some extra highlight. And I'll use it for the belly of my owl. And again, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to color from darkest to lightest and leave a little bit of white space for some extra highlight. My squirrel has to be a red squirrel because that's my favorite animal in the whole wide world. I'm going to use E13, E15, and E17 to give me that nice reddish brown shade. Using that E17 first for my darkest, blending out with the E15, and then I'll add that E13 in there on the face and the hands and the tip of the tail. For the feathers of my owl, I'm going to use W00, E70, E71, and E74. And I've used this combo a lot for other critters, but because the area that I'm coloring is super small, I actually probably would have left out that W00. On a larger critter with a bit more space, it adds a nice bit of highlight. But on this one, I didn't really care for the way that it was looking. So when I did my second coat on him, I ended up coloring over the W00 with that E70. And then for my crow, I'm going to use W5, W7, and W9, keeping that W9 as far away from the eyes as possible because it is super dark, and then blending out with the W7 and using the W5 on the face and chest and the lower part of the wings. Then I just need to add some rosy cheeks to all of my critters. I'm going to use R11, R20, and R22 for that. Just a little oval shape first with that R22. I'll even add it to the tiny little cheeks of my snail. And then I'll blend out around the edges of that with the R20. I also added a tiny bit into the fox and the hedgehog's ears, and then blended out on the lighter colored critters with the R11. Then I grabbed a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and got that going off to the side until it was flowing nicely. And I'll go over the eyes of my critters that have their eyes open to make them nice and dark and shiny again. And then I will show you the second sheet of images that I colored off screen. And I will trim all of these out with their matching dies. For my background, I've trimmed down a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface Cardstock with the largest of the Lawn Fawn outside-in stitch rectangle stackables. And I'm going to be creating a night sky on this panel using some Distress Oxide inks. I'm starting with some peacock feathers in the center, doing kind of an oval shape. And then I'll bring in some chipped sapphire from the outside edges, and I'll bring that right up to that peacock feathers. So at first, it's not going to look very nice. Distress Oxide inks look so much better when you layer them together. So it's going to take a couple layers to get this looking how I want it. But right now, I'm kind of just blocking in those colors and seeing where I want everything to go. So I'm going to lay on a good bit of that until I'm happy with it, and then I'll go back to my peacock feathers ink blending tool and work over that a bit and blend that over the edge of the chipped sapphire so that things start to meld and mix a little bit. I'll do the same with the chipped sapphire once again, bringing that over the edge of the peacock feathers and just darkening up the edges of this cardstock. These colors are pretty far apart, so it does take some time working over them again and again to get it to blend nicely, but the end result is so worth it. And then finally, I'm going to come in with some black soot and darken up those edges even further. I want this to look like a really deep, dark night sky with a really vibrant turquoise center. So I'm going to add quite a bit of that black soot, and then I'll come back in with the chipped sapphire, blending those two shades together, and then back again with the peacock feathers in the center, until I'm happy with how that looks. And once I am, I'm going to start distressing it. I'm going to add some water to an acrylic block and pick that up with a thin paintbrush, splatter it all over the panel, and then give that about 30 seconds to soak in and start to lift those Distress Oxide inks. And then I'll blot that up with a paper towel that just gives me a nice pale little fleck in there. I'm also going to add some of these Gansai Tambi Starry colors in this pearl shade and tap that all over the background so we get some nice little stars in our sky. These are going to be really shimmery when you tip the card into the light. And then I'll add one more layer of stars. This time it's going to be bright white using some Dr. Peach Martin's Bleed Proof White. It's just an acrylic paint, a white acrylic paint, so it's really pigmented and opaque. So I'm going to mix a little bit of that in with the water that was already on the block and then tap that all over the panel. So now we've got like 3 different levels of brightness of stars, which I think is really beautiful. I'm creating an insert for the inside of my card, so I just trimmed down another piece of white cardstock with the same die that I used for the background piece on the focal panel. And then I am stamping in some peacock ink. I did the little porcupine, and I'm also going to add a sunflower and the Have a Happy Day sentiment. So I'm just lining up that sunflower on there so it sits on top of the stem. And then I'll set that aside. And now I'm ready to start assembling this card. I have scored and folded a piece of Rainforest Cardstock to an A2 standard size card. So it's 4 1/4 wide by 5 1/2 tall. I added my insert to the inside, and now I'm going to add this nice night sky background to the outside of my card. And that's going to give it a nice little frame around the edges that kind of ties in with the center of that panel. And now I can bring in my images. I'm going to be adding these with a combination of foam tape and liquid glue. I want to have different levels on this little scene, so I'm kind of layering some things flat on the card, other things I'm popping up to give them dimension. I want to be able to tuck things behind and add things over top and just create a really layered and eye-catching nighttime fall rainbow scene. So I added that little trio of pumpkins down at the bottom center. That's kind of the anchor of my scene. And then I layered that little sleeping squirrel right in front. I'm adding a little cluster of mushrooms over on the right hand side, and then a snail, and I'll tuck a little leaf in there to hide the cut bottom edge of those mushrooms. I'll take my owl and add that kind of standing on top of those mushrooms over on the right hand side. And then I have this little crow that is going to be standing on one of the pumpkins. And now I'm going to work my way up the left-hand side of the card. I'm adding in the hedgehog over toward the tip of the leftmost pumpkin. And then I'll add a few little elements underneath. I'm tucking in a cluster of small leaves, an extra little mushroom. I'll pop up a little purple leaf, just adding all those vibrant colors and layers of dimension. I'm going to take these little vining plants that are from the You Are Sublime and tuck those back underneath the little hedgehog. I love those little plants because I think they work well in so many situations, definitely not just for under the sea cards. And then I'll have that beautiful rainbow pile of leaves just above the hedgehog. And I'm going to have the little fox standing behind that inside the pile of leaves. So I'm tucking him back behind. His body and tail are glued down flat, but I did add a piece of foam tape back behind his head. And then I'm popping up this stump and adding the other little snail on top of that. So we have those snails kind of diagonal from each other, which kind of draws your eye around the scene. I'm going to tuck the sunflower back behind the head of the fox. So I actually needed to remove the foam tape from behind his head because I didn't want 2 layers of foam tape. And he's already popped up because the sunflower is popped up. And then I'll tuck a couple of leaves from You Autumn Know back behind this sunflower. They're the perfect size for that. I've got a tiny little pumpkin from the Happy Harvest and then the trio of mushrooms from the Porcupine for You. So I'll add those to the right of the sunflower. And again, just tucking in some more of those fall leaves and spreading those little pops of color wherever I can. I'll trim down another one of those vining plants and tuck it back behind the snail. I'm adding another little pile of colored leaves in front of the pumpkins down below. And then over in that empty space on the top right, I'm going to add the little moon with clouds and the additional cloud. And then I'll add another little sprig of those leaves and just start filling in some of the empty gaps that I can see. I'm going to take that little many thanks card from the Spring Basket Add-on Fall, and that is actually going to be my sentiment for this card. I'm going to add that to my fox's hand. You can kind of see that the layout for this card almost mimics the shape of that crescent moon. I kind of wanted all of the images to wrap around that. And yeah, I thought it was just a really different and fun layout. I desperately wanted to use this flying crow. I love this crow so much. It's one of my absolute favorite fall images from Lawn Fawn. But I just couldn't make it work. It made that area of the card look too busy. And the same with these kind of blowing leaves. I decided just to leave those off, but I did add a little flower into the hedgehog's hand. And then of course I need to add some sparkle. So I'm going to take some Stardust Stickles and add that to my clouds and my moon and all of the fall leaves on this card. The only leaves I didn't put it on were the sunflower leaves and the vining leaves, but all of the colored ones and also the pumpkin leaves, I added a little bit of sparkle to those. And that is going to finish this card up, so I will lift that to the camera so you can see it in more detail, give you another peek at the inside. I think this is probably my favorite card that I've made in a while. I just had so much fun with this one. I used a lot of images that I absolutely love, and I just thought the color palette and the layout were super fun. So I hope you guys enjoyed it too. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell if you want to be alerted when I post new videos. All of the products I used will be listed and linked in the description bar below the video in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon in the next. Bye-bye!